Hello and good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. And if not, today offers a fresh start. Sadly, we got pounded yet again with another snowstorm out east here. I mean, come on, April. On a better note, I completely forgot to mention this on Thursday's episode, but last week I had the opportunity to go scuba diving. My friend is fully trained to scuba and she goes all the time, but last week she had the chance to bring some friends in for free. It was only in a pool since we're not certified or trained whatsoever, so it was nothing sensational, but I still had a blast and it will definitely have a hold on me in the future. After I pay these damn taxes, I will most likely look into getting certified. It's not that expensive, and how cool would that be? I can only imagine how much more extraordinary it would be in the ocean. I mean, just sitting there underwater for more than 20, 30, 45 seconds or whatever it is. It's just so peaceful. I highly recommend it to anyone who loves the water as much as I do. Okay, so last week we covered the murders of the Knight family, and I truly didn't want to do back-to-back family massacres, but here we are. Again, I had never heard of this tragedy, and I can honestly say I think it will be new to you as well. Today, I bring you the Blockland Murders. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from one source. I found a single article about this case. Even the newspapers from decades ago are in German and non-accessible to me. And if you Google any of the victims' names or even Blockland Murders itself, still only one single article. It's titled, "My Grandfather's Whole Family Were Murdered, but He Found a Way to Forgive the Killers," by Lilli Heinemann. I kid you not, I tried every possible combination of words to search for this, and almost every link that pops up takes you to the Hinterkaifeck family farm murders, but that has been covered 1,000 times, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Thankfully, the article that I'm using today as my source is written by the granddaughter of a surviving family member, if you didn't get that from the title. And she has written an exquisite piece detailing this tragic history. I highly recommend you check out the full article. I do this story no justice compared to her. And just for reference today, when I use I or me during some of the quotes, it's in the perspective of the granddaughter, Lilli. The events that occurred the night of November 20th, 1945 were never talked about amongst the Heinemann family. To them, it was better left in the past. Quote, "In late 1945, my grandfather, Wilhelm Heinemann, then 43, was living with his family in the remote neighborhood of Blockland, just east of Hamburg in Germany, near Bremen. The flat, waterlogged land was drained by ditches and canals, and the farms were set far apart from each other. On the evening of November 20th, my grandfather and the other residents of the farm were at his house. His parents-in-law, Wilhelm and Meta Flottmiller, his parents, Heinrich and Berta Heinemann, his wife, Margaret, their 4 children, Ruth, Martha, Leichen, and Will, a visitor by the name of Beta Gerdes, the maid, Meta Howard or Meta Howled, and the farmhand, Fritz Heitmann. 13 people in all. I apologize for any of the terrible pronunciations of these names. They spent the evening together, and around 10 o'clock, they went to bed," end quote. Just before midnight, this tight-knit family and friends were awakened by loud noises. Wilhelm, the 43-year-old Wilhelm, arose to see what the ruckus was, and when he reached the hall, he was met face-to-face by a group of armed men. According to her article, the intruders were led by a man who spoke good German. He pointed his gun at my grandfather and forced him to fetch everyone in the house. Together, they were locked in a bedroom under guard. The men cut the telephone line, blacked out the windows with pillows, rummaged through the cupboards, drawers, and chests. They were stealing clothing, valuables, jewelry, heaping up their spoils. Then the ringleader ordered my grandfather and the others down to the cellar. After every member of the household crammed themselves in, the intruders followed. The leader of the armed men asked Wilhelm if he had any intention of reporting the crime to the police, to which Wilhelm fiercely denied. He promised the men that his lips were sealed in return for his family's safety. However, it wouldn't matter. The man who asked the question quickly loaded his gun and shot Wilhelm once in the chest, piercing his lung and bringing him to the ground. Then, the rest of the men stepped up, loaded their guns, and shot the remaining family members, killing 12 people in a blink of an eye. Wilhelm, as he lay on the ground, was shot 3 more times in the foot, arm, and his thigh. Quote, after firing the last shot, the men switched off the light and left the cellar. Their leader returned 3 more times to make sure no one was moving. The last time, he walked up to my grandfather Wilhelm, lifted up his uninjured leg, pulled off the shoe, and threw the leg back down on the floor. He did the same with the left leg, which was bleeding heavily from the foot. Despite the pain, my grandfather played dead until the attackers left the farm. Then, using his unharmed left arm and right leg, he crawled in the dark over the corpses of his family up into the living room. Somehow, someway, he managed to reach a neighboring farm 2 kilometers away on a child's bicycle, the only means of transport that the men hadn't taken or destroyed. Once there, he called the police and was taken to the hospital in nearby Bremen, where he would spend the next 3 months recovering. The photographs I found at the Bremen State Archives in the summer of 2018 must have been taken shortly after the police arrived at the scene. I flicked through a file containing police reports and medical certificates. An envelope was stuck to the back of an autopsy report. I opened it, unsuspecting and unprepared, and took out 3 black and white photos that shocked me to the core. I couldn't look, and I couldn't look away. They showed the view into the cellar on the night of the murder from 3 different angles. The lifeless human bodies were packed close, curled up, blood flowing from their mouths and noses, drying on their faces, nightshirts soaked in even more blood. Besides them were provision, jars and pots of preservatives, egg boxes, potatoes, and I looked at these pictures knowing that if these people hadn't died, I wouldn't be alive today. End quote. I simply cannot imagine coming across this scene as a police officer or anybody. There's no doubt in my mind that most of them had to go throw up outside afterwards. The image would be forever seared into my mind. As for the murderers themselves, 8 of the 10 suspects were found in a displaced persons camp and arrested in the following days. The ringleader of the group, identified through his friends or colleagues, named Zygmunt, had fled after the murders and was never seen from again. The trial for the following men would begin several months later, but in the meantime, a large funeral was held for the victims on December 1st, 1945. Sadly, Wilhelm was unable to attend as he still couldn't leave the hospital, but he had his words read by a friend on his behalf. Wilhelm wanted the attendees to know that, quote, "Our house was always a house of love, where the lowest found respect and the poorest found help. This shall continue to be my lodestar. Now is an especially apt time for people to, again, appreciate and do good to one another." End quote. According to Lilli, in her grandfather's book, he wrote that just before the trial ended, the public prosecutor told him that he would be seeking the death penalty for all 8 apprehended men. My grandfather asked him to do so only for the ringleader and the men who actually carried out the shootings, and he demanded lesser penalties for the others. After 3 days of deliberation, the judges passed their sentences. The ringleader, Zygmunt, convicted in absentia because he disappeared, and 4 other men were condemned to death by the firing squad. A further 3 received life sentences, another one was given 40 years in prison, and a 9th man, arrested later in Munich, also was sentenced to life in prison. The court files have been lost, so we cannot know the exact reasons for the different sentences. Although the murder weapons were never discovered, there was other incriminating evidence, including the fingerprints of 2 suspects, and her grandfather could identify at least 5 defendants in court, although none of the suspects actually admitted to the murders. The 4 condemned men were eventually executed on a former firing range on July 13th, 1946. And now here is why I found this story so fascinating. Wilhelm, the sole survivor of possibly the most traumatic event ever, forgave his attackers and started a brand new family. Now, keep in mind, he and his family were deeply religious, which played a large role in the decisions he made after the attacks, but still, to do what he did takes more humanity than I will ever have. His forgiveness is why he chose to never pursue Zygmunt years later when his location became known, and why he asked the judges for lighter sentencing of a few of the individuals. Quote, "My grandfather's forgiveness may have been grounded in his faith, but it was also political. He saw the crime in the context of its time and understood that the young men who had been brought to Germany and exploited as forced laborers had experienced terrible things themselves." In an April 1967 newspaper article, my grandfather was quoted as saying, "These people had lived through difficult experiences that had filled them with hate. The leader of the gang had lost his parents in the war. The SS had shot them dead in Poland," end quote. That would be Zygmunt's parents. Why the robbery ended in a mass murder still remains a mystery. The intruders had no relationship with my grandfather or his family. Although one of the men later said in court that he had asked Zygmunt what happened in the cellar, and he had answered, quote, he had finally got revenge for his family, end quote. And this is normally where our story would end. But Wilhelm here picked himself up by his bootstraps and decided he had enough love to try again. According to Lilli, Wilhelm met his wife in the hospital while she cared for him after the murders. It was clear they fell deeply in love during those months, and with accommodation scarce after the war, they had no alternative but to move back into the Blockland house where it all happened. They started a family and had 4 children. Quote, "As with my grandfather's first family, there were 3 girls and 1 boy. The first 3 were given the same names as the dead children, Ruth, Elizabeth, and Wilhelm. My mother was not named after the 4th murder child. She was born much later on November 20th of 1958, which is ironically the anniversary of the killings. But Wilhelm still had even more good to do in his life. Quote, in 1967, more than 20 years after the murders, my grandfather discovered that a journalist had spoken to 3 inmates of a Hamburg prison. Gisela Godlewski, Michael Strokey, and Marjan Oboza. They were 3 of the men sentenced to life in prison, having been found guilty of taking part in the robbery, but not the shooting itself. The men's appeals for clemency had been repeatedly denied. A pardon was dependent on the men returning to Poland, but their home country refused to take them. Lilli's grandfather decided to visit the prisoners, and on April 8th of 1967, he wrote, he was received by the prison director and spoke to Godlewski and Oboza. The 3rd inmate, Strokey, refused to talk, saying that he had no interest in a pardon. The 2 men were brought to see my grandfather in a visiting room, one at a time. Godlewski was defensive, certain my grandfather wouldn't be able to help him or that he was there for the wrong reasons. Oboza didn't understand why my grandfather was visiting him at all and said that he had had sleepless nights over the years. A few weeks later, her grandfather returned again to the prison. Quote, in a letter dated April 29th, 1967, which I found in the Bremen State Archives, my grandfather wrote to the U.S. ambassador requesting that the 2 men be pardoned. Quote, I have now visited Godlewski and told him that I have forgiven him. Should he be pardoned, I hope to take him in and employ him as a janitor in a private, old people's home that I own. As the man most affected by the attack, I ask you, Your Excellency, for mercy for a man who did wrong in the confusion of an unprecedented time and who regrets it. He has served 21 years. That is a very long time. Hate will ever only sow hate, and therefore It is time to stop hating once and for all. End quote. Again, the pure humanity of this man is incredible. His appeals eventually were heard, and both Oboza and Godlewski were released just before 1970. Wilhelm did exactly as he said he would and took Godlewski in where he worked until unfortunately he began receiving death threats for his participation years ago and was forced to move. And so Wilhelm and his children led a relatively peaceful life from then on, barring any nosy reporter. Quote, more than 50? No, that says 70, Eli. More than 70 years have passed since the murders. Everyone I speak to in my family is willing to talk, but I get a sense that they would prefer to let the subject lie. Time and again I hear, we didn't talk about it, and why can't we leave the past in peace? I ask them about the story's significance in their own lives, and they look at me in surprise, as if they've never thought about it. Many of my questions remain unanswered. I admire my grandfather for forgiving, but I still don't understand how he was able to. It could be that forgiveness was a survival strategy. Maybe for him, it was the only way he could go on living. End quote. I too asked myself this over and over while reading her article and putting this together. I mean, I can barely forgive student drivers who slow down the traffic, and he's taking in a man who hurt him more than we'll ever know. Simply astounding. And that, my friends, is the tragic story of the Blockland Murders. I hope you enjoyed this episode, or maybe learned a thing or two at least. I really think that not many people have heard of this story, and I hope it's new to you. Thank you all once again from the bottom of my heart for taking the time. Stick around for a bonus bit after the music. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Hey, y'all. I done caught you an exciting one this week. Remember Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, who killed their spouses, or allegedly killed their spouses, and 2 children? Well, Dear Chatty Boy's trial is just beginning. As of last week, they were still selecting jurors, but this is possibly massive. I just hiccuped. It could be massive because he's pleading not guilty. And I'm pretty sure everyone believes he had took part. Anywho, titled, Jury Selection Begins in the Trial of Chad Daybell from CBS. Juror selection is set to begin Monday in the trial of Chad Daybell, who was charged in the deaths of his wife Tammy and then-girlfriend Lori Vallow's 2 youngest children, 7-year-old Joshua, or JJ, and Tylee Ryan. The bizarre case drew national attention after JJ's grandparents reported the children missing in 2019, weeks after each was last seen, and shortly after the death of Tammy Daybell, which was initially attributed to natural causes. The children's bodies were found burned and buried in the Daybell's backyard in eastern Idaho in 2020. Chad Daybell's trial is expected to last up to 10 weeks. The 55-year-old self-published author is charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The children's mother, Lori Vallow, now Daybell, who married Chad Daybell just weeks after his wife's death, was convicted last year by an Idaho jury and sentenced to life in prison without parole in a trial that laid bare the couple's bizarre, doomsday-focused beliefs. The couple claimed that they could tell if people had been possessed by dark spirits that would turn them into, quote, zombies. Former friend Melanie Gibb testified in court. They believed the only way to get rid of a zombie was to destroy the possessed person's body by killing them. Chad Daybell also is charged with insurance fraud in connection with Tammy Daybell's death and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and grand theft by deception in the children's death. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. Daybell has pleaded not guilty. Last week, his attorney John Pryor told KIVI-TV in Boise, Idaho, that Daybell is ready to go forward with the case and, quote, wants to tell his story. Chad and Lori were originally scheduled to stand trial together, but in 2022, Pryor asked the court to split the cases. saying that the co-defendants would have, quote, mutually antagonistic defenses, which essentially means a jury would have to disbelieve one defendant in order to believe the other defendant. Pryor told the judge, "Our version of the facts of this case will differ greatly from what Miss Vallow and her legal counsel are going to be presenting." The grim case began in the fall of 2019 after extended family members noticed Lori Vallow's two youngest kids seemingly had disappeared, and they prodded law enforcement to launch a search. The subsequent months-long investigation spanned several states and took several grim and unexpected turns. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were having an affair when both of their spouses died unexpectedly. Police learned that Vallow's husband was shot to death by her brother, Alexander Cox, in Arizona in July of 2019, and the brother, he told police it was in self-defense. Lori was extradited to Arizona following her Idaho conviction, where she faces 2 charges of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of her husband and in the case of Brandon Baudreau, her niece's ex-husband, who authorities say was shot by Alexander Cox. Cox suddenly and unexpectedly died in December of 2019. Tammy Daybell died in her sleep in November of 2019, and that untimely death was first chalked up to natural causes, but was later determined to be from asphyxiation, according to her autopsy. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell married just 2 weeks after Tammy died, surprising every member of their family and, of course, authorities. The couple's friends later told detectives that the pair also held very unusual religious beliefs, including that they had been reincarnated and were tasked with gathering people before a biblical apocalypse. And this is the part I remember most from the case, as it blew up years ago. Lori Vallow Daybell referred to her 2 youngest kids as zombies before they vanished in September of 2019. Prosecutors say Lori and Chad Daybell espoused these doomsday-focused beliefs to justify the deaths of her kids and his wife, but it was all part of a scheme to eliminate any obstacles to the relationship and to obtain money from survivor benefits and life insurance, end quote. Rightio fucked up that one is. I have a feeling I know where this verdict will lead, but who's to say? Let's just all keep an eye on that case, shall we? He pleaded not guilty, so, not guilty. Anywho, that is all I have for you wonderful human dubadumans. Thank you all once again, and I will see you on Thursday. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.